be seen in the next item, actually just a few items below, our request for funding to make sure that Palms is present and on the map for that. Please join us at our next meeting, which is second Monday of every month at 7 p.m. at the fire station. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to push the bylaws committee down past the exec committee, just because that's not as pressing, both my committees, so I'll just defend myself. Homeless ad hoc committee, if Paul can give a brief, because our chair is not here, but Paul is the vice chair.
Hey guys, in lieu of the actual homelessness committee, we actually met and did the homeless count, and we had a great turnout. We all met at Culver Palms Church of Christ, and that's where the meetings are monthly as well. But we had a lot of folks turn out, and we walked for probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours counting homeless individuals. We didn't have too many. Well, my group didn't have too many, but there were a lot of people there. Nick was there. He was present, representing the neighborhood council, and he gave a quick brief on what we do and who we are. And I think it's a great program in general. I encourage everybody here next year, if you guys feel the urge to do it, I encourage you to come out. I think it's a great opportunity to meet your neighbors as well as do something great.
We had like 100 people come out?
And that total I don't know.
At least
I'm not sure. It was a lot of folks.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
If you were there for the homeless count, can you just briefly raise your hand? Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Just want to thank you guys for coming out.
Good work.
12 teams of 4, so like 50 people, give or take. Right.
Yeah.
So
turnout.
just to add briefly onto that, to explain to folks why the homeless count is so important, because certainly when I first heard about it, the idea that we were counting homeless people did sound odd when you first hear it, and it absolutely is. It's important because if the city and the county of Los Angeles don't know where the homeless individuals in our neighborhoods are living or which neighborhoods they're living in, they don't know how to direct services. So they don't know where the hot pockets are, otherwise everyone would just be like, oh, it's all in Skid Row, there's nothing in Palms, if we didn't actually have real numbers to drive that. And of course, for the federal side, in terms of how much grant dollars the entire county and the city gets, having totals to show how we compare to other places. So getting an accurate count is really important, because if we undercount, we basically are cutting ourselves off at the knees in our ability to help. So that's why it's important for folks that come out next year. It's almost always in February.
The next meeting is February 22nd at the church as well, and it meets the fourth Wednesday of every month.
Great. All right, moving into the exec committee report. We had a very robust exec committee this month with a number of policy things, as well as trying to really drill down to how we want to finish out our budget year, as is totally normal for a council that's just been seated, 6 months, 8 months ago, with a vast majority of new members to the neighborhood council system. It takes a little bit of time to get your initiatives together that you're going to spend real money on. So we basically had a robust discussion, asked all the committee chairs to kind of submit ideas for things that they wanted to spend money on, and came up with the following list that we would like to adopt is basically our spending plan to kind of close out the budget year. So that motion is to adopt the following spending plan, which includes $5,000 to $7,500 for Palms Community Day, which Paul just talked about. A mailing out to the seniors in our community about sidewalk repair, because of the fact that your sidewalks, it's a 30-year program for sidewalk repair we've talked about, but if you have disability access requests, which anyone who is classified as a senior could basically say, I have trouble getting over this, we're hoping our seniors will help get our sidewalks fixed for all of us, which is going to be awesome. So that's true, yeah, and I've definitely done it, and I jog at night, and I've eaten it a couple of times, but unfortunately, I can't claim to be disabled for the purpose.
Someone with an AARP?
Just 65 plus.
Oh, 65.
Yeah. So,
Soon for us, though.
but we're open to changing that definition, however folks like. We are allocating $4,000 to the Palms Hub for Ciclavia in collaboration with Motor Avenue Improvement Association, that also has been doing a great hub there for years and years when they do Ciclavia down in this direction. 2 projects along Overland Avenue around adding the new trees into the tree wells that have been empty has come up a couple of times over years. We've never actually managed to get all the way there and get the new trees in on Overland. Allocating the public art dollars already in our budget to Overland Avenue for murals at $3,000. Contributing towards the city's efforts to finally repair the sidewalk behind USPS for $3,000, although I might get away with not paying that because I don't know that they had asked us to help, but I think they might do it anyways. So may not actually spend it. We'll see. A food truck event that's being spearheaded by the Commercial Corridor Activation Committee for the Palms Food Truck event for $3,000, and then a sponsorship program, which is actually the item right below this as well, to basically help fund local artists to paint the utility boxes that are on our commercial corridors in our neighborhood that aren't currently painted. Obviously, we've all seen those around. I think everyone really appreciates that, those blank canvases are used. There's a few that either aren't painted or used to be and eventually got replaced because it's been like 5 years since they were last painted. So we'd like to make sure we can get them all painted. So that's the proposal for the board that the exec committee approved. If there is a second to bring that to the floor.
Second.
Hearing a second from Elena. Questions or comments from the board?
I'd like to make an amendment.
Shoot.
I'd like to amend the motion for all items to be stated as not to exceed the amount given.
Yeah.
I also would like to request that the Palm Hub amount increase from 4,000 to 5,000, given that we're thinking of barracks and balloon arch that might actually cost more, so that would accommodate for that as well as giveaways.
Okay. I do want to, before we move on, I want to mention that I think I crossed off one before I mentioned it. Native plantings along Motor Avenue and under the Motor Avenue I-10 bridge, which costs somewhere between $6,000 to $9,000, depending on how many plants we get. I don't know how I skipped that. So, okay, so we got an amendment on the table. If there's a second to that amendment.
Could I also make one more amendment as well?
Sure,
We have to
but
second.
so
As soon as we
there's a
second.
second from James. We've got a second to that amendment. So that amendment's on the table. Is your amendment to amend that amendment or separate?
No, separate. So
Okay, so we'll work on that one first. Questions or comments on the amendment?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
So with the comment of not to exceed these amounts, as I understand it, this motion is to allocate an approximate budget amount, but the actual funding motions can differ from these amounts.
Correct.
So would the amended motion make it impossible, should we learn of additional expenses for some of these items, to propose a funding motion for more than this amount?
Would not make it impossible.
It
You
would
could
not make it
absolutely bring it
possible.
back. So basically what we're doing here is saying, here's what we think this is going to cost. We'd like to move forward with these projects so long as they don't exceed that amount. If they do exceed that amount, got to come back to the board and say, here's how much it exceeds it by, here's the invoice, and what it's going to be.
But to be clear, we would have to bring the funding motions to the board anyway.
Yes-ish. So so that's really the question for the board based on your level of comfort in terms of, so sometimes we've done things where we say, here's what it's going to be, and we want updates to the board every time we have meetings, but we obviously only meet once a month. And it could be that a week from now, there's someone who comes in who's got the proposal for the, let's call it the mailing for the sidewalk repair. And it's approved in outreach committee, it's under 25K, they want to move forward and get that going. That's the question of the board now is, are we comfortable with that, or do we want to make it, or do we want to ask that every actual invoice comes here first?
And
That's an open question.
This is actually why I added the amendment. I think that these are all public funds, and any additions, this should come to the board.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
the-
I think the question is that is that the requirement anyway?
Yeah, I think
And that's
I'm
a
with
separate question.
Elena on that. I think this inherently states that we're allocating $10,000. I do not think that allows us to then spend $10,001.
The problem is that it doesn't even explicitly state that. It just says that it will adopt the following. I just want to make sure that's stated on the record that it's not to exceed.
Yeah, I think either way that's fine. I think the better question, I think the more important
we
question
amend
is,
Can we get
what,
more money?
you can absolutely get more money later if we approve it.
Correct.
But I think the other question you're asking is,
My question is, if I have actual receipts in hand or invoices in hand to buy supplies for murals, and I know the exact amount, it will likely differ from this amount, maybe by some margin. Do I need to bring that to the board
If it's-
if it's greater than, equal to, or less than this amount? Only if it exceeds, and that's just not how we've done funding motions
that is correct.
heretofore. So I'm just mentioning that that's a change.
Yeah, it's a very valid question because there is definitely a question of trust in budgeting. Do we want every single invoice to come here before we pay it? Which is nice. When we meet once a month, it's very hard to get
Correct.
projects done. So that's the question of the board I'm asking, because if that's what we're going to do, we should agree on that and move forward.
Just to be clear, I don't have an opinion. I just wanted
Yeah.
the answer.
No, it's a great question.
I'd like to offer an opinion. I mean, the person who's submitting the invoices isn't also writing themselves a check, right? I mean, we have our treasurer who is supposedly vetting the invoices, and if there's some sort of problem, she can bring it to our attention. But once the amount has been allocated, I think that that's enough of a check, at least for me, to feel
Stick within
comfortable
it.
that every invoice doesn't necessarily have to be brought back to us if it's within what we've already approved.
And not only, I guess this is not the best time for us to be notified, but our treasurer is vetting it, and then it gets into a monthly expenditure report that does get back to us, and we approve every month.
There you go, yeah.
So it is after the fact we've spent the money, but we do have checks and balances within there, and notifications within there.
Okay, so we're on that amendment on the 5,000 and the not to exceed. A second from James. Any other comments on that amendment? Yes, Richard.
Just a question on the native planting and the tree wells. Who's going to be doing maintenance on the plants? And where does that money come from?
So that's all part of the budget amount that went through the Green Committee. So the vendor for that, I'll say it was Highland. Yeah, so it'd be covered by both the local property owners as well as Motor Avenue has offered to make sure that those get cared for since they cover that stretch. So on that amendment, any other questions? Okay, so move that to a vote. Any abstentions? Any nays? All right, so we're on the main motion again with that amended to 5,000. Paul, you had a separate amendment?
Yes, after speaking with Joseph as well as some other input for yeah, I think the allocated budget 5,075 is kind of low. I'd like to move it to $10,000. Now, I also got information from Joseph in regards to subsidies. We labeled the Palms Community Block Party, and I believe because of that, the councilman's office will actually give us the money to cover a significant portion of the actual of the Palms Community Day, and if that's the case, then we'll be under. But I think because it's time sensitive and we put a cap on it, I think waiting for the next meeting month to, I guess, approve an increase would be very difficult to move forward on this event, and I think a ceiling of 10,000 would be better than 7,500.
Okay, so a second for that?
A second.
Seeing a second, just for those that are keeping track, on the outside of our range, we're now at 46,750. So that's about what our budget is left. So we of course have other things we do spend over the next 5 months. So something to keep in mind. Not that everything's going to happen in time for the end of the budget year, and so it's likely that we won't get all of these necessarily completed as expected, but something to keep in mind. So that's on the table now. More questions or comments?
Yeah, just commenting, looking at our FY 16-17 budget, we allocated $11,500 for community and outreach events. I don't believe we've spent any of that down, but I know that we have this 3,000 for the food truck event, which would probably fall into that budget line item. We've got the Cyclovia Palms Hub, which also falls into that budget line item, which we've now expanded up to 5,000, so that counting is 8,000, plus another 10,000 for Palms Community Days, 18,000. When at the outset of the year, we were very conscientious around budgeting less for events than we had in the past. The note around that was we had not had clear metrics around those events and the impact of those events, and we wanted to kind of spend more on more meaningful ways of outreach. I'm not saying that these particular events don't also reach that goal, but just flagging that outside of the year, 11,500, current budget 18,000, but we're almost at the end of the year, so I don't know what opportunities we have to spend any more than that, other than the block parties, which we have promised to help support and subsidize within the community. So, just overall context.
All good points.
Question? Yeah. How necessary is it for us to include
certainly if they came back to us and said, hey, we're really still banking on this, then that would be something to consider. So would you like to make an amendment?
If Paul's approval. Still on the amendment.
We're on this amendment, but we could amend this amendment to include that amendment. Because it is consistent, we're trying to make it work.
I'll bring to the author of the amendment.
So do that as a friendly amendment to your amendment?
Yes, we're striking the USPS alley repair.
Okay. Alright, so still on this amendment. Any other questions or comments on this amendment?
My question, has the council member's office committed to giving any dollars to this or any sort of support or
To
present?
Yes.
To the community day.
Yeah, so speaking with Joseph, the councilman's office is on board. I spoke to him today, and basically anything that we need, he's gonna try to get us. There's certain aspects of the permitting, that we have to do, but they're gonna work on things to waive, so we don't have to put our energy into it, but they are fully.
Any other questions or comments on that amendment? Seeing none on the amendment, I'll move that to a vote. Any abstentions? Any nays? Okay, so we're now Palms Community Day revised to 10,000. Strike UPS alley repair. Back on the main motion. Any further amendments from the board?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
a clarification, please, on that last amendment. Was that including both about the Palms Community Day and the USPS alley repair?
It was.
Okay, and it was mentioned to increase the funding amount for Palms Community Day from a range of 5,000 to 7,500 to
Just 10,000 as a cap.
Was that to 10,000 or to not to exceed 10,000?
They're
like
all
the
not.
others?
They're all not to exceed. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. So seeing no more questions or comments from the board, I don't have comment cards, but I do see two people that have raised their hands. Would appreciate comment cards in the future, but in the back.
Just a quick question about the follow-up. I mean, I think it sounds pretty reasonable to allocate this money in advance, but, will each person that's been assigned one of these chunks of money to sort of bring back a total of the amount spent versus the amount allocated? Not individual leftovers, just, hey, here's just a follow-up, here's, we allocated $5,000, this would be we spent $36.50, the rest of it back, something like that.
Yeah, I can definitely commit to that. Also, as part of the treasurer's report, we do it's line item by every expenditure we've made all year, and that's in every monthly packet. So,
Sure, it's sometimes
yeah, it's difficult to necessarily go through the entire list of all this. Absolutely. So I think we can definitely commit to doing that. I'm comfortable with that. Yeah. And then Kalani?
Two things. With the election coming up for the council seat, are these funds that you are counting on from the council member's office guaranteed regardless of who holds that seat? Or is it tied to the current member of the council? Should that person be defeated? Could we still count on funds and help? Will that money be set aside prior? Has it been set aside? I mean, what are the factors there so close to an election? The second thing is, considering we're trying to go green, I would, at some point down the road, like to know why we're using so many comment cards and relying on them so heavily.
Yeah. So to answer the question about the councilman, the changeover in seat happens at the same time as our fiscal year, July 1. So the current council member, whether elected or not, would have authority over those funds up until the point where our fiscal year would end. So I don't foresee a particular problem there. But of course, at any point, they're discretionary. So that could change whether or not the election were happening. That said, for Palms Community Day, the permit fees, the city has a standard fee subsidy program for block parties that allow the council office with their fee subsidy account to cover half of permit fees. That's very standard. So I would be surprised. Every council office basically covers those for block parties in their districts, and they usually have more than enough money to cover those fees. So I wouldn't expect that to be a problem. And the alley repair is expected to be done, I think, by the end of March. So that's basically, and that's already in the workflow for the Bureau of Street Services. So once it's in their workflow, it's unlikely to change. All right.
The cards.
Yeah, I think that the 5 pieces of paper for the comment cards are not a huge issue compared to like this thing that I print out every week. That said, we do have a projector that was giving us problems today, but we now have and works. So we're going to try to figure out how we can start projecting our agendas on the wall, and whether that's in any way feasible for someone at the end of the table to be running through an agenda. Haven't fully figured that out yet, but I think it's definitely something to discuss. Okay, so seeing
So when would you like put comment card in, like, in?
anytime before the item is called.
Okay.
So they're just right on the table.
You come in late. It seems like this stuff should be before, not
That's a good point. I'd be happy to put some over there as well.
Incentive to
Yeah.
come early.
And at any point, so at any point you can go grab a comment card. Yeah, just walk over, write on it, and submit it. It's very standard for me. I mean, because the main reason that we're using comment cards, we're at almost 9 o'clock now. That clock is actually fast. So the only way to get to our agenda is to really ask folks to, ahead of time, know which items that they really want to speak on, versus what has happened often in the past is like someone mentions something on the board that might be interesting to somebody, we get a back and forth discussion, and we don't finish our work. So comment is closed on this one. Thank you. Because you've already commented. Okay, so we move that into a vote. Any abstentions? Any nays? That passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item, which is item 2 under the executive agenda, which is a motion for the PNC to approve conducting community outreach to Palms residents and adopting a Palms Neighborhood Council policy to sponsor utility box painting with $250 per box with a $12.50 budget cap, which we just basically approved, for local artists to paint the remaining utility boxes in Palms. If there's a second for that.
Second.
Questions or comments from the board? Richard?
Just as a question, if I do the math, that's 5 boxes are being painted?
Yeah.
And how many boxes are there in the city that need to be painted?
In the district?
In other words, is this gonna come up every 6 months, every 2 months, every 3 months?
So I think there's about, give or take, probably 10. So my goal is by the time we're done with our 2-year term that we'll have finished painting all the boxes that are left.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I just didn't know.
But there is definitely ongoing maintenance that's required because the paint doesn't last forever. But we were pleasantly surprised with how long the last round of painted lasted, and some of them are still, all the ones that say Palms at the top and have like hands on them, those are painted not last board but the board before, and many of them are still in great shape.
How much tagging goes on?
Actually, very few. They've shown that for public art, it actually reduces tagging substantially because a lot of people that are taggers, whether folks agree with it or not, do consider themselves to in some way be artists and don't tend to like to.
It's aspirational art.
Yeah, it's so to paint another artist's work is not considered kosher. Yeah, so if it's other gang graffiti, that's a different thing. Andy.
The outreach that's being conducted, that's being requested in the motion, can we clarify in that motion what that outreach is for? Are we asking for artists, participation, awareness?
Yeah, I think it's just to let people know about the policy and asking artists to come out of the woodwork. So through the newsletter, predominantly.
Okay. And can we clarify? Can we just add that to them to it? This is your motion, right?
Yeah.
So I just so we're clear, approves conducting community outreach to recruit artists, raise awareness, etc.
Sure, that is a friendly amendment. So I'll take that on consent unless anyone objects to that. Seeing none, we'll add that in. Any further questions or comments from the board?
Yes.
Yeah.
In regards to picking local artists, who's actually doing? Are we doing that?
So that would come back to the board.
Through actual board.
Yeah. So the art would be submitted to the board, and then the board would have to approve that expenditure to that individual. Yeah. All right. Seeing no other questions or comments on the board and no comment cards, we'll move that to a vote. Any abstentions? Any nays? That passes unanimously. We'll move on to. I'm actually going to hold item 3 just because it's not as time sensitive as other things. We'll hold that for later. Move on to item 4 under the exec agenda, which is a motion for the Palms Neighborhood Council to support the RAC motion requesting weekly West Side planning bulletins from Council Districts 5 and 11. So this is a request from the West Side Regional Alliance of Councils, which our neighborhood council is a part of, and helps to just kind of unify the voice of West Side councils on issues. We actually often don't agree with some of our other West Side councils. It's a very renter-focused area. But on this one, want to bring it to the boards. I think it is interesting and timely, basically asking our council offices to tell the neighborhoods about what's happening on the planning side in a more regular fashion, whereas right now we just get like these very dense and complicated documents that just gets shipped to our inboxes or mailboxes that you guys have probably seen that are really hard to digest for both the council and for you. If there's a second for that motion.
Second.
Seeing a second on that from Paul. There was Mark Edwards, is a comment card for this item?
I know it's for,
It's for the one after that, right? Okay, you have 4, but I think you mean 5. Yeah. Okay, so questions or comments from the board? Seeing none and seeing no comment cards, move that to a vote. Any abstentions? Any nays? That is unanimous. All right, Measure S. Motion that Palms Neighborhood Council resolves to communicate to the LA City Council that it opposes Measure S on the March 7th ballot. Is there a second for that?
I second.
Hearing a second from Andy. We invited both the pro and the con side of Measure S to this meeting. I have one comment card from Mark Edwards, and I believe you're from against Measure S, correct? Okay. Yes, right. Against, yeah. So you've got 2 minutes, but we'll give you some opportunity for questions if people have them.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and fellow stakeholders, and hopefully fellow renters. My name is Mark Edwards. I'm with the Coalition to Protect LA Neighborhoods and Jobs. We are probably the largest, most diverse coalition that's ever formed in the city of Los Angeles to fight a ballot measure. It is a very fascinating coalition. I'll give you a quick example. Eli Broad, billionaire, known for being a developer. And then we have Larry Gross, who created the Coalition for Economic Survival, which is a group that's been focused for 30 plus years on protecting renters' rights. In fact, Larry Gross was very instrumental in the creation of City West Hollywood, where I reside. And why have they all come together? For one very important reason. Because no one Measure S goes too far. We have a housing crisis. We have a homeless crisis. I worked for the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority 2005-2006 on a 10-year strategic plan on homelessness. We said that we need a lot of units of housing. We were very clear on that. And we said the price for doing nothing was not going to be nothing, it was going to be more homelessness and greater cost. We didn't do anything back then, and we find ourselves in a worse situation. When Measure S says that they will promote or allow affordable housing, that is not true. In fact, the city of Los Angeles has 12 housing opportunity sites that's focused on providing permanent supportive housing for those who are chronically homeless, and 11 of them need a general plan amendment. So they would not be permitted under Measure S. And furthermore, most of these projects are not just straight 100% affordable, they're mixed-use projects. And so even as a mixed-use project, because it has some retail in it, it would not be permitted under Measure S. And then further, they talk about a housing ban, it's only for 2 years, but then they add greater restrictions. They limit the ability to do additional type of general plan amendments. And I'll just backtrack real quick and say that the good news is the city of Los Angeles, city council, the mayor, all have heard and are listening, and that they actually have a council file 16-0422, by which they're actually taking action on updating the general plan framework and start working on community plans. And so there's action being taken. And so there's no need for a lot of what's in Measure S. We understand that the process is not the best process in the world, but I believe that it's up to neighborhood councils and neighborhood groups to be working with the city council members and with the mayor to make the changes necessary to make planning more effective for your communities. But a one-size-fits-all approach is never effective, it doesn't work. Measure S goes too far, and the coalition would be honored to have the endorsement of the Palms Neighborhood Council. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So we'll now open it to public comment. Hey, look at that. Which I have one from Kalani.
I'm Kalani Whittington. I've been a resident of Palms for 30 years now. I know I don't look that old, but I have been here and I've seen tremendous changes in the neighborhood. Currently in my neighborhood, There are 4 buildings going up right now. And though they say they're setting aside affordable housing, who is monitoring whether they are truly renting to people who are in need of those affordable housing units? I don't believe there's anyone monitoring who gets to rent those units, or if they're even being set aside. I'm not sure how I feel about Measure S. I do know that we need something done about this overdevelopment without benefiting the community. Because I have seen a number of this neighborhood alone has exploded in the number of rental units. Have rental costs come down? No, they have not. We have just seen rental prices go up, more people, less infrastructure, more crowds, and things keep getting rubber stamped. I believe that the measure, I still have to check into the details, just says, states, let's take a breath. Let's see what happens in 2 years. I don't believe the homeless problem is due to the shortage of housing. It's the shortage of reasonable, because the affordable housing scale also changes depending on the building. So I had a brain injury a few years ago. Anyway, I was forced out of the workforce, and I don't even qualify for affordable housing.
Thank you, Galani. And we had another card submitted for Cat Stevens.
Hi. Quick, I'm voting no on Measure S, and I just want to share in case you guys get some numbers in the mail. We're going to talk about how they don't like LA City Council changing the plans for their neighborhoods. But I think what we need to keep in mind is that a lot of these places were zoned decades ago, before we saw mixed-use developments coming in Los Angeles. So if you are the kind of person who supports the living where you can have businesses below and apartments above, and you want to see more apartments in the city, I would consider the fact that giving the city council the opportunity to rezone these areas, to give permission to rezone these areas and Developers Act, actually gives the city council the ability to ask for neighborhood improvements from the developers. So it gives us and our council members a lot more freedom to ask the developers to give back to the community. What Measure S will do is tie our elected officials' hands and not be able to negotiate these improvements when developers come asking for favors from our city. So in my determination, really it's a win-win when developers want to contribute new buildings with commercial space and apartments to our city, and council members can ask for improvements from them. No Measure.
Thanks. All right, so we'll move this to the board.
I was wondering if I could respond to her real quickly, if you don't mind, about the housing.
So
It'll be real fast.
So I'll ask you to hold, and just we'll see if someone from the board asks a question directly, and then in which case we can do that. Did you want to make a public comment?
What area? It's West LA, you said?
Oh no, this is for the entire city of Los Angeles, 408 square miles.
Okay. And does Measure HHH conflict with this, or?
It will hurt Measure HHH and Measure JJJ. It will create a lot of uncertainty, if not stop momentum.
All right, so I'm going to move to the board for questions or comments, either questions to our presenter or questions to other members of the board, and comments. I'm going to look to my left this time. So I tend to look right first for some reason. Nothing. Seeing none to my left. Questions or comments on my right?
Make a brief comment. I'm also against this measure. We recently passed the affordable housing measure, which is actually going to build affordable housing units in the city. This directly contradicts that measure and would disallow what the voters just voted in. It's true that the city council does need to update the general plan, but they're working on it. Never a good idea to do land use planning by
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that too. I'm also against it, and we need to keep in mind, Los Angeles is the largest city in LA County, but we're one of 88 cities in Los Angeles County, and these developers, if they can't build in Los Angeles over the next 2 years, they're going to want to build anyway, and they might just be building in Santa Monica or Burbank or Glendale, and some housing that we desperately need will end up going to another city, because they're not going to wait even if we're waiting.
All right, seeing no other comments on the board, we'll move that into a vote. And this is a vote to oppose Measure S on the March 7th ballot. By the way, there's election March 7th. For anyone who didn't know that, city election, you should definitely vote. No matter what you want to vote on, you should vote. Move that into a vote. Any abstentions? Seeing none. Any nays? Seeing none. That passes unanimously. So Mark, you're welcome to let folks know on the coalition that they can add our name. Shoot. Great question. So we are allowed to do voter outreach to encourage people to vote. In terms of actual ballot measures, what we just did is the limit of what we're allowed to do, which is to provide impartial information based on, you'll notice I just linked to ballot PD and the official sample ballot, invite both sides to give them equal opportunity to present. Yes, didn't want to come. Not my fault. And then tell people to vote. But we because we are a government body, each of us individually are basically technically politicians. So we can all take a position on stuff, and I can go shout from the rooftops whatever I want outside of this body. But other than that, basically what we can do is advise the city. We think our community thinks X on this measure, but we can't spend any public funds to campaign one way or the other.
Will there be any specific outreach just to get people to vote?
Absolutely. So our newsletter will definitely later this month encourage everybody, probably top banner, being like, hey, by the way, there's an election, you should vote, and link to information about the election that is impartial. Yeah, absolutely. Is there a question?
No, I think if memory serves me correctly, the proponents of Measure S did visit this council and did give a presentation a couple months ago. So.
You mean JJJ? I think it was JJJ.
Yeah, that's something else.
Last election. But either way, so we've now taken that position. We're going to move on to items. I like to take them together, 6, 7, and 8, which are all related, which is to oppose Measure N, support Measure M, and support the RAC motion about Measures M and Measure N. So to explain those, M and N are both related to cannabis. Obviously, in November, we all know that Prop 64 passed. The state voted to legalize the recreational use of cannabis. And part of that was basically allowing local jurisdictions to decide if they would like to also allow the sale of recreational cannabis. What most people don't necessarily realize is that the ballot measure folks voted for in November doesn't mean that the 7-Eleven down the street can go sell pot now. I'm sure some people were thrilled about that, other people not so much, but the reality is that every city has to opt in to recreational cannabis sales if they would like to do that. City of LA is currently controlled on what's called Proposition D. That's an interim control ordinance that the city voters passed, I want to say 2009, but don't quote me on that. 2013. My DA friend next to me knows better than I because he prosecutes this stuff. Actually, I don't know. You probably don't prosecute. That's all the city attorney. But so there's 135 dispensaries in the city of Los Angeles that were permitted by the voters under that system with what was basically immunity from prosecution to sell medical cannabis. Measure N was put on by a coalition predominantly of those folks that were on the business side of that coalition of people that already have permits to basically ask the voters of Los Angeles for a legalization of both, not just the medical, which was already legal, to sell in this city, but also the recreational, and to provide early opportunity into that market for those particular folks. The City of Los Angeles City Council, after that measure qualified by voter signatures, the City Council put a competing measure on the ballot that said, hey, we agree, we should, create a regulated market for recreational cannabis sales since the voters chose to do that in November. However, we don't want to give early opportunity to any particular business interest that has a vested interest in this market. We'd like to take that ability to regulate into the city council's hands to then regulate and continue to regulate as things change on the ground. So that was what the exec board discussed and what the West Side Regional Alliance of Councils discussed, and basically said we'd like to support Measure M and oppose Measure N, support the city, oppose the one that was put on by the commercial interests. I do want to note before we move into the discussion on this vote, the city of LA, if the city votes no on both of these, recreational cannabis sales would not be allowed until such a measure did pass. So if folks on the council, just to make sure it's clear to all my colleagues, wanted to make sure that recreational sales did not occur in the city of Los Angeles, you would want to vote no and oppose both of these. So if you want me to pull these apart and not vote on them all together, let me know. We'll just do that. Okay, so moving that to the floor if there's a second.
Did you explain the rack motion?
Yeah, the rack motion just says what I basically just said. It supports M and opposes N.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's in the packet, somewhere near the back.
I'll second.
Hearing a second from Allison. Okay, questions or comments from the board? I hope that was relatively clear on what is, as usual, confusing city initiatives, because thank God for direct democracy. Seeing no questions or comments on my left after that bit of editorializing, no questions or comments on my right, and seeing no public comment cards, move that into a vote on those three. Any abstentions? Any nays? That is unanimous. We will let those folks know and let Rack know. Rack will be so happy with me. I haven't actually managed to get us to support lots of their motions. Okay, so we have finished with the exec report. Appreciate that. Would like to do a time check with folks on the board and ask how you're feeling, because we do have our bylaws left. Now, there's not a lot that's changed in the bylaws that's different than what we did over the last 5 meetings to amend our bylaws. So we could kick it to next meeting because it will still probably take 10-15 minutes just to walk through it, because I have the entire red line thing. How are folks feeling?
How many people do you need for quorum?
We need 7.
So how many people can leave?
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2 could leave.
How heavy is the next agenda?
I recommend putting it to the next meeting, just because it's nice to be able to go over these with some deliberation, and then we might have more then as well.
Okay.
We also learned in our last meeting that this is where we have the most to send.
Yeah.
on
Okay.
our board.
So I think that seems like
I don't trust
that seems like a consensus. I'm good with that. So we will table that to the next meeting. What I do want to ask folks is, in recollection, before we table that, is the last meeting we added a youth seat. We added it from 14 to 22.
Correct.
I was looking through the record of this meeting and listening to it and looking at the language, and the way the language is written in the actual bylaws is 14 or older and younger than 22. So was that our intent to make it basically 14 to 21 inclusive, or was it 14 to 22 inclusive?
I thought we said 22 inclusive.
Okay, I'm hearing a 22 inclusive,
it was 22
22 inclusive, 22 inclusive. Okay, so I will bring that back written that way, since it wasn't clear as I went through and finished the final giant red line of this document last week.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
One thing that I want to recommend that the bylaws committee study and actually come up with a motion for our next meeting is I'd like to see something in the bylaws for our committees and some sort of consequences or procedure when committees don't meet for more than 3 times, or when chairs are absent. Some sort of update and procedure on all of that to the board.
So what I would like to, as you'll see under G, update and potential dissolution of the committee, pending adoption of final bylaws amendments, my hope is, since it's an ad hoc, is to dissolve the committee as we finish these bylaws and then take subsequent once in a while bylaws or ground rules changes into the exec committee. So if you would like to write something up, I'm happy to entertain it in the exec committee. Although I would suggest it should be in the ground rules, not the bylaws.
Sorry,
because
I get
bylaws
it.
are a royal pain in the butt to change, I gotta tell you. Because once we pass it, we gotta submit a form to the department reviews it. If they approve some or all of our changes, they send us something back, then we can appeal it to the board of neighbor commissioners. If they approve it, great. If they don't approve it, then we can appeal it to the city council. It's fun. Yeah, so that's a process. Okay, so we will table G under the bylaws committee, items I and 1 and 2. Might as well not disband it until we need it. Neil, one of my vice chairs, just texted me to say, woohoo, more bylaws committee meetings. I'm going to assume that's